All right, I wanted to go ahead and introduce our lunch speaker, Mike Plumer. We're very pleased to have you here, Mike. Mike has been working with conservation issues for over 30 years now. Much of that time as a staff member with Illinois Extension, a leadership role there, and has worked a lot with cover crops for the last couple of decades. He's coordinating a variety of trials now. Part of that work is with the Illinois Council on Best Management Practices. He's also involved in some partnership efforts involving industry and other organizations such as the corn growers. So Mike is playing a variety of roles in providing leadership on cover crop research and also education efforts. He's authored a number of resources on cover crops, and I think you'll find has a great wealth of experience for us to draw upon today. So with that, Mike, I'll go ahead and introduce you. Thanks.
Okay, is the mic on? That's good, so I don't have to talk too loud. Okay, we'll get started on this, and I think the one thing that we need to start thinking about that you've seen all this morning is soil quality. I just thought I'd show you an example of a field in central Illinois that I've been involved with that shows poor quality soils, and this is a drummer soil type, which is the most productive soil in the world. And what do you see about it? It's bad news. It's wore out, it's beat up. And biological activity is so bad that after 18 months, the corn stalks aren't decomposed that they moldboard plowed under. So got a long ways to go when we put cover crops in this field, and we eliminated that issue in 2 years. So the thing we need to look at also is we're looking at root development on different crops, and we pull root samples on everything. Just thought I'd show you this one up there on time and when we're pulling them. This is in December on a ryegrass planting, and these are also, we've got some radishes mixed in. This is also the depth of rooting on the different varieties. One thing people need to understand right off the bat is there are many, many varieties of every cover crop. And just because you want to go buy a cover crop doesn't mean they're going to sell you the variety you need. 90% of the time, they probably won't. On ryegrass, we've got some good varieties, and we've got a huge amount of bad varieties. Of over 50 varieties that I've looked at in the Midwest, there's only 5 that are usable. And what I found out was from talking to some of the folks this morning is the ones that are sold in Missouri are one of the poorest ones. So you need to beat your retailers up and switch. And if you want good rooting to improve soil water infiltration, you look at some that are getting 40 inches of root development when the ryegrass is 2 inches tall on the 20th of March. That's just 2 inches in height of the plant itself was when those were taken. So that's variety. No roots to speak of. You can't afford to do that. You're defeating yourself before you start. Pick the right varieties. It's all about, all about roots. I don't know where I stood, but it's all about roots, basically on how to grow the roots, how to get that rhizosphere built up, how to put organic matter in the root systems. We've done a lot of work over the years looking at no-till and then adding cover crops to that. And these are some of the soils that I deal with that really are pretty tight. Fragipan, claypan soils, we're looking at is moving through trying to do that. I didn't have the latest figures on this one. These are down to 1.3 now after 9 years. So you can see our soils, look at all the silt deposits, an albic layer that's developed that stops rooting. Most of our corn crops don't go below that if they're planted into it in a conventional tillage system. So look at some of the different roots on the different plants and what do they look like. Oilseed radish. One thing about oilseed radish, it will make some big radishes if you plant it early enough. Oilseed radish grows based on temperature. It's not a cool season crop. It likes warmer weather. The later you plant it, the smaller the roots will be. The more nitrogen you have left over in the soil profile, the bigger the roots will be because they're a luxury feeder on nitrogen. So they do have a main tuber, and then they can have a taproot that goes below that. Rapeseed, basically, we're looking at not that deep a rooting system, not that heavy. Oats, same way, good fibrous, good for the fall for erosion control. Does a very nice job in the fall and good for forage, but it's not a deep-rooted plant. Hairy vetch, as well, is very fibrous, and you'll find that hairy vetch is one of the best plants to get soil tilth in a soil faster than anything else. But hairy vetch cannot stand wet feet. It will die when it got wet feet. So annual ryegrass developed specifically for fibrous roots and deep rooting, and it loves acid subsoils. Where it's produced for a seed crop, the subsoil pHs and the surface pHs normally run between 4.6 and 5.2. So the seed has been developed to grow in acid conditions like most of our claypan soils are. In my area, most of our subsoils are running 4.7 to 5.2. That's why ryegrass grows real well. That's why I brought it to the Midwest to work with it, because it likes acid soils. And it will penetrate. And we have measured in excess of 60 inches. I've measured it as 72 as the deepest that the roots will grow. And that's planting it in September and killing it the 1st of April. Cereal rye. Fibrous roots, if it's in an acid subsoil, it normally doesn't get much over 24 inches. Put it in a montmorillonic calcareous subsoil, it'll put roots down to 40 inches. It doesn't like acid subsoils, so it doesn't go nearly as deep. Austrian winter peas, normally we don't get a lot of good root development out of it. Most of everything's in the top. Wheat, fibrous, but it's pretty shallow. And we normally discourage using wheat as a cover crop, because if we tend to plant too early with wheat, then we're going to injure, or we're going to be a host for a lot of diseases and insects that if the neighbor plants wheat as a commercial crop, you're going to damage his crop. So we normally don't recommend wheat as a cover crop, unless you plant it after the fly-free date. That's what we would recommend. Triticale is starting to be used a little bit, mainly because we finally have increased the price of cereal rye, so it's cost as much as triticale. Once you double the price on one of the cover crops, the other one becomes more economical, because that's where it's always been. Turnips, macropores, they don't get very deep. The taproot really doesn't go that deep at all. So some characteristics on rooting issues. Oilseed radish doesn't like acid subsoils. And typically when we get a claypan layer or a fragipan layer, the surface, or a plowpan layer with its acid at 12 or 14 inches, the radishes will hit that and turn sideways. And even the taproot will go sideways. Got to be aware of that. You may need to put in some other cover crops to open some pores up to allow the radish to root deeper, because the radish won't do it on its own unless it gets some help. That's why we mix it with other things. We mix it with cereal rye, we mix it with ryegrass to allow it to get deeper rooting. Rapeseed typically will hit the pan and go sideways. It won't penetrate it at all. Oats will not go through a silt pan. Vetch rarely goes deeper than 12 inches. We really don't see it going much deeper than that. Ryegrass likes acid subsoils, and it likes to penetrate with a root. And I was trying to find my picture I took this fall on a strip mine reclamation. I got ryegrass roots growing through sandstone and splitting the layers of the sandstone in two as they break through the platelets on the platy layer on the sandstone. In my thousands of slides, I lost it somewhere. So winter pea doesn't do well in poor, it does really poor in acid subsoils, and from Interstate 70 south, it's not a very good crop at all. We never recommend it. North of 70, it doesn't do too bad at all. South of 70, we don't get any production on it, we don't get any nitrogen produced, and it doesn't survive the winter because of our weather patterns. So we're not real fond about winter peas. Basically, wheat and triticale don't have a strong enough root system to penetrate, and turnips as well. You know, they really don't root deeply. What about oilseed radish? This is precision planted radish that we're working with. We're at 1 pound per acre in 30-inch rows. We're looking at the benefits of the radish on root development. I don't know if you can see it right here. This is where the old radish was. These are corn roots that are just flat going right into the radish where it was, and they're following the radish taproot down and going on down quickly. On this particular field, we measured corn roots at 62 inches in a frangipane soil. I'm told that's not possible, but I throw all the soil scientists in the pit with me, and they get to look at all the roots, so they get to see that. What about residue problems? This is a field that's been in continuous corn for 12 years, BT corn, producing on an average 170 to 175 bushels per acre. And we got a problem with it because we can't maintain enough residue to be in compliance within our CS plan. We're less than 30%. Even though we've got heavy residue, the radishes and the vetch with high nitrogen levels have created so much activity that the earthworms and the fungi just break the residue down so fast. By mid-June, that's all the residue we have left. Not very much. I thought I'd throw a plug in for being careful in how you do tillage. And this is a study that we did. Vertical tillage is big in Illinois. I don't know if it's big over here. Everybody bought one in southern Illinois because it dries the ground out in the spring, right? It does. What does it do besides that? Look at that 4-inch thick compaction zone that it created by doing it in the spring. This is 9 years continuous no-till, and the guy destroyed his field in 2 years with vertical tillage. You want to see what a wheel track looks like in vertical tillage? That's the wheel track from the tractor pulling the tool. How does that affect the rooting in it? Look at the bowl here. That's the corn root. The only reason that corn root's going down, there's an anhydrous tract right here because he put on pre-plant anhydrous, and it's following the anhydrous tract. Compare that to 15 feet away where we've run 8 years of cover crops, annual ryegrass and crimson clover, and this is the same soil type, like from me to the projector apart. 2 different management systems. Remember, when we deal with cover crops, we got to start thinking systems, not just a practice. It's a system that we got to work with. So look at that. You see all the development that's going on the rooting on that plant. See the roots keeping on going down. There's 12 inches. See the roots here and here and here? What's the tape measure say right there? Anybody read that? 60 inches. That's corn roots in a claypan Cisne soil type that's 60 inches. Does that happen? It does if you got a good system in place and you set it up for that to happen. But you got to plan for it, you got to manage for it. What about tilth? This is a Cisne claypan. 11 years of cover crops. Started out at 1% organic matter. It's running 3.3% right now after 11 years. 3.3% to a depth of 10 inches. It's the same organic matter level at 1 inch as it is at 10. That's what the cover crop roots have done, have moved the organic matter down in the profile. Look at the tilth on it. We got a good pore space on it. We got good structure on it. How well will cover crops work? This is the plot where we do disc field cultivate. I only got to do that for a couple of years, and the farmer got so disgusted he won't let me do a disc plot anymore. He doesn't want to see that. This is right close to it. These are corn roots at 31, 32 inches in depth in a Cisne claypan soil. Is that a decent root system? Can we get production on corn? If we got root systems like that, we can, right? That's the problem with our Cisnes or our claypan soils. We don't get root development. We've got to open the soil up to allow that to happen. How far did those roots go? Here's 50 inches following those corn roots. They're still going. But standing on my head in the bottom of the soil pit, you have to use a flash photography and you can't get pictures that deep down in the hole. So they were down at 72 inches down in the bottom. So you can change that soil's ability to allow plants to root. You can get roots deeper in a clay pan soil. It doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a little bit of work, but that can be done. You're also seeing more diversity showing up. You know, we're getting some earthworms developed. We're starting to get some soil structure developed, and that's important. You got to look at it to find it. And about 15, 16 years ago, we decided to go underground. I've been an agronomist for 35 years with the university, but my training was all above ground. Well, back in late, 96, 97, we went underground, and now I find myself stuck in soil pits more than I am on top. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at what the soil's doing. Can we influence that? Can we change it? Can we allow those corn roots or soybean roots to go deeper? But after you dig a few pits, you start to realize that you've ruined your research area. So my farmer and I sat down and scratched our heads, and we bought a Giddings soil probe, and he got his welder out. We put together a 3-point hitch soil probe. That's a 4-foot, 3-inch probe, and 2 years ago, we decided all of our roots were going past the bottom of the hole on corn roots and cover crop roots. So now we put a 2-foot extension on that. So we push 4 foot, pull it, add a 2-foot extension, go to 6 foot, and now we're having troubles. I've got to go deeper than that because I got roots out the bottom of 72 inches in depth on clay pan soils. And because we're getting up in the 10-year range, 11-year range on these farms, looking at that. So it's awful hard to push a root in the ground, a probe in the ground to look at roots. And if you notice the rack on here, I don't know if you can see that, there's 2,200 pounds of suitcase weights stacked in there. That's the bare minimum to get that probe in the ground 6 foot. We've got to add another 500 to 600 pounds of weights in there as we're going below 6 feet, because we just got so much soil resistance on the parent material in that soil going that deep. So what's nice about it, I can pull a lot of samples and look at the roots. The nice thing about good healthy roots is they're bright white. They show up really well. And so you learn a picking technique with picks that you pick all that soil apart, you trace all the roots down and look at them. And the other advantage is when you're pulling a 4-foot core in a one piece, if you want to preserve it, you just get a PVC pipe, you set the probe in the PVC pipe, push the core out, glue the caps on it, and what I've seen is I can glue the caps on them and store those probes, those tubes, for 5 or 6 years, and when I take them out, they look just like the day they put them in. What happens is your microbial activity basically transpires, pulls all the oxygen out, and everything stabilizes and stops. So it's kind of interesting that everything just stops working. And so now I'm pulling tubes off the shelf that are 5 and 6 years old and comparing them to the tubes I pulled that day. That makes a lot of difference. You can really see. I mean, you know, a lot of field days that I'll go to, I'll carry tubes of soil with me and lay them out for farmers to look at. And if they can get in there and they can pick around on it, that really changes their ideas. They get involved in looking at how those things look. You'll also start seeing all kinds of different things as you develop all the macropores. You'll find that the crop growing after the cover crop or the year after the cover crop will utilize all of those things, but you can't do tillage. If you do tillage, you break that pattern up. What about soybean roots? We're starting to look at soybean root development. How deep should a soybean root go in clay pan soils? What do you think? Everybody's seen a soybean root, the taproot hits 12 inches and goes flat? That's a possibility. Here's a depth that's on ryegrass. We were pulling the cereal rye and the ryegrass studies, how deep the rootings were in the soybean study. We're at 30 inches right here, and we got soybean roots below 30 inches in a Cisne clay pan soil. What happens when you get that much root volume that you can pull nutrients and water from? You got a healthier plant later in the season when things go adverse. And so you can do that. But you can see the different roots off that soybean plant going down. The other thing we're starting to do, Cisne typically has a 5-inch topsoil. That's where the organic matter is in 5 inches. Take a look at this. This is 12 inches. And look at this anomaly right here. What do you see? This is going towards the top. This is subsoil. Look at this. This tests 3.2% organic matter every inch down to 10.5 inches. At 10.5 inches, it goes to 3.4. We're getting accumulation on the B horizon. This is an albic layer of silt. And it's hard to see, but if you look close, you'll see breakouts right there. We're actually having macropores that we're leaching the organic matter down to 16 inches in depth, and it's moving from 16 inches back up. And we're getting streaks from the silt leaching 40 and 50 inches down into the subsoil. And we've actually got a soil scientist for NRCS totally ticked at me, because when I put him in the soil pit to get an explanation on this, he said, you changed the soil characteristics. That is no longer a Cisne, but we don't have it cataloged because there is no such soil as this. Because the characteristics was that silt band at 12 to 14 inches that is no longer there. So interesting that we do that. Here's your corn roots on that particular site. This is 66 inches in depth, and we just couldn't get any deeper. That's the bottom of the probing we were doing. We couldn't get an accurate sample below that. 'Cause that's all the deeper I can get my probe. We're seeing mycorrhizal development on roots deeper in the soil profile, not in the top. They're moving down. How does that affect farmers? What do they think? This is one farmer I've done a lot of work with over the last 15 years. Of the 18 fields he had out there, these are arranged based by yield. For the first 18 fields he had for yield were all cover crops. And then below 18 is where he had some mixed in cover crops and other cover crops out of the 38 different fields. But we found out we had 2 of them down at 36 and 38 that had cover crops that were real low yield. And we had to go back and look, and we found out why, because his hired man forgot to spray that ryegrass. That field didn't have any herbicide on it. That's why we had it low yield. So you got to manage all these fields that you deal with. And one of my projects that I work with the Buffett Foundation, the High Yield Conservation Project, we're just finishing the data on that. The farmer I'm working with, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 and some fields that we're dealing with. Our strip trials this year were in 59 fields for replications. This year, he now has over 15,000 acres of cover crops planted on his operation. He farms 20,000. And 4 years ago, he had no cover crops. So it can change very quickly once they see what it looks like. And if you want to show farmers real quick, here's a side-by-side comparison. Cover crop, no cover crop. Yield monitors stand out and look you in the face really fast. So you can see that. What about soil test changes by cover crops? This is too complex to look at because we're going all the way down to 35 inches on soil tests. Let's simplify it a little bit. This is changes in P and K with the cover crop and without a cover crop. Notice without the cover crop, there's a little change, but not much. With the cover crop, P1 test from 20-something to 70. K test from 130 to 260 in 4 years. We're mining the subsoil. From the previous slide, if you could have time to look at that, the fertility levels on soil tests at 35 and 48 inches are going down. We're moving the nutrients that have leached down and bringing them back on top. What happens if you do tillage? Does the nutrients move up? No, it doesn't. This was another site that was supposed to be a no-till site, and after the first year I got no responses, and I went back and found out the guy goes in and heavy discs all his corn stalks in the fall. So he does heavy tillage down to 8 to 9 inches every fall. And what we saw was that shuts off the movement and the rooting depth on the crop as well. Can't do tillage. What about a study? This is like 9 replications. We looked initially at conventional versus no-till cover crop, and then the farmer says, well, what's the difference between just straight no-till, and how about conventional converted to no-till versus a cover crop with a no-till? There's a difference. The cover crops increase in the yields. We're getting a yield increase from the cover crops. How much? Here's a trial that we did. This is an 8 replication trial. Straight ryegrass versus no cover crop in 2012 when we had a real dry year. What's the advantage of cover crop? Stabilizing yields in bad weather conditions. What about some management practices we're looking at with them? County yield average was 30 bushels per acre in this county in 2012. If you don't manage the cover crop, you can hurt yourself. You can reduce your yield because your roots are pulling all the moisture out. You're not saving enough moisture. You can delete it if you don't get replenishment in May and June like we normally do. So we can see a lot of difference. This is what we're playing with now is RTK and corn on a radish row. And we're getting some big yield responses that doesn't make a lot of sense. Other than the fact we've just found out that the radish slow releases its nitrogen over 3 months. It doesn't dump it all at one time. That's an interesting thing. So we put some dollar figures on it for the economists real quick. If I went from 30 to 79 on an average management, that's $294 an acre increase in income for that farmer. If we could do the RTK, it's $900 an acre on a bad year. Not every year, that's a bad year. Is there some incentive to buy the equipment to do the project right? There can be. Some of the issues when we're dealing underneath the soil, what we need to look at, cereal rye. Look at cereal rye and cyst nematodes. These fields, this is a 4-year study, 4 different fields over 4 years, looking at it. Initial cyst counts were running between 9,000 and 13,000. Just the cover crop alone is reducing the cyst counts in 1 year. We do have an effect on cysts by raising the right cover crop. Does that affect yield? Well, at those high levels, it should, shouldn't it? It does. It makes a major difference on it. So, uptake, nitrogen uptake. Here's looking at ryegrass on nitrogen uptake. It's one of the best luxury feeders on nitrogen we have. It's deep rooted in the profile. If we got an issue with nitrogen and tile lines, ryegrass is a preferred species. And I listened to issues on how ryegrass is the worst thing in the world. So we thought we'd tell you basically what we see people doing, and they follow this program very closely. They do everything wrong. Spray it in the afternoon when it's cold and cloudy. Why is that a problem? Glyphosate does not translocate in cold and cloudy conditions, and glyphosate stops movement in a ryegrass plant 2 hours before sunset. It also doesn't move fast. It takes 4 hours to get from the leaf into the vascular system to kill the plant. So what happens if you spray it in the afternoon? It stops translocating when the plant stops growing. The plant stops growing about 2 hours before sunset to protect itself in the cold weather. What does glyphosate do? It ties up. You lose 20 to 30% of the glyphosate immediately that dark period. If it's cloudy and cold the next day and you don't get actively growing ryegrass, what happens when it hits the next dark period? You lose 80% of the glyphosate ties up intercellular in the plant. No effect. Has no effect on that plant at all. Okay? That's work I did with Monsanto researchers directly. I saw it in the field, we took them to the field, and they explained it to me. In fact, I even got to meet the guy that discovered glyphosate and spent a half a day with him, and he said, "Boy, of course it doesn't work, it shouldn't. It's a translocated product. You have to have a very actively growing plant for it to translocate. If it's not, it doesn't work." The problem is it neutralizes once it's in the plant. If it goes through a dark period, it locks it up so it doesn't translocate. It's done. Use AI nozzles with large droplets. That's what everybody's preaching. All the guys are saying, you got to use AI nozzles. We find that AI nozzles lose 40% of your control on ryegrass instantly. Doesn't work. You'd never use AI nozzles. Not unless you got them in the medium to fine spray range, which none of them come that way. Use an AMS substitute product. We did research on that. We found out that probably 50% or better of the AMS substitutes don't work at all. They don't do much of anything. Use 15 to 20 gallons of water. Why is water important? Glyphosate translocates based on the concentration per droplet that hits the leaf. If you spray with 20 gallons of water, you have to double the glyphosate rate to get the same control. It's plain and simple. Dump glyphosate in before you use AMS. If you got water like I've got water that's high in iron, magnesium, calcium, glyphosate immediately attaches to any mineral in the water. If you don't have a treated tank with AMS or citric acid or something similar to precipitate all the heavy minerals out of the water, you can lose up to 80% of the entire glyphosate by it locking up on the minerals. So how do farmers use it? Most farmers will pump it through into the tank as water, and they'll use an invector to pour and shoot it in as they're pumping the water. Then they put the AMS in the tank. So what did they do? Absolutely nothing with the AMS because they put it in after they already locked up the glyphosate. They screwed up. I see researchers doing the same thing. Mix it with other herbicides as well. You can't kill ryegrass when it's beyond vegetative stage. Yeah, right. Yes, you can, if you do it right, if you follow the procedures. Here we're looking at some different products, and we're in the 95, 98% control range on some of them. What about Liberty? It's worthless as far as control on most of our cover crops. It burns, but it doesn't cause anything else. Look at the difference in varieties on how they react, and this is where the flag leaf is coming out on the plant. The control is based upon the stage of maturity of that plant. They're different maturities. So if the head was actually exerting, we got high level of control. If the head was still in the boot stage and not out yet, we didn't get as much control with the gramoxone. So we got a weed scientist to work with us. Took 10 years. What are we looking at? We're looking at some of the things that can be done to give good control. So I highlighted those in red. If you use glyphosate, you use AMS. So that'll give you the control. These are different varieties. This is Rootmax. Temtebo's a tetraploid, and diploid. Split shot. If anybody remembers bringing fescue out of CRP into crop production, remember how we did that? We learned eventually you could spray it in the fall, but if you sprayed it in the spring, when I started no-tilling in the early 70s, we split shot all the fescue. Hit it with gramoxone and atrazine, and then plan to come back in 2 weeks and hit it again. And we always got complete control in the spring when we did that. That works. Ryegrass is not an annual. It's a forage grass that's already 6 to 8 months old when you're trying to control it with a 40 or 50-inch root. You treat it like a full-blown forage grass, which is what it is in the spring. Split shot works very well. 2 shots of gramoxone. Gramoxone followed 2 weeks later with Select. 98% control. Is that a problem with control? No, it's not. So we already talked about this, went through that. You got to know what to mix with glyphosate if you're going to work with ryegrass. Never mix atrazine or Callisto. It's guaranteed 30 to 50% reduction in control because it ties up the glyphosate. Basis blend, rimsulfuron is a fantastic product. That's what we need to be mixing all the time. If you got a problem and you sprayed with glyphosate and you didn't kill it, you're going to come back and spray it with glyphosate, right? No. If you screwed up in a cold weather situation and you had a dark period come in, what you don't realize is when that dark period comes in, the glyphosate that's there stops the translocation sites. So the second spray of glyphosate may not translocate at all in through the plant. And I've seen people spray glyphosate 3 times and never improve their control because they went into a cold, dark period and sprayed it late in the afternoon and really screwed the plant up. So it wouldn't accept any translocated ability off the glyphosate. So how do you fix it? Burn it to the ground, let the new growth come up that's clean, and then it dies really easy, really simple to control. If you're looking for ryegrass management, here's the website we've put together on it. It will have my management manual for ryegrass in there. You go in there and look under publication, and it's right in there. You can look at the publication. It gives you step-by-step procedures on managing ryegrass. And ryegrass management and wheat. In fact, everybody's scared of wheat. With ryegrass, the guys that raise ryegrass for seed use wheat as a crop to eliminate the ryegrass from the field. You just got to know how to do it. We can clean a field up by planting wheat in the field and using the 3 herbicide applications it takes. And we can take the ryegrass completely out. It's not a problem in wheat unless you ignore it. If you ignore it, it'll destroy your crop.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike.
Okay, sorry.
I think we've got time for 2 questions before we start our next section.
How much is ryegrass used in Illinois, and do you recommend it for a corn soybean rotation cover crop?
How much is ryegrass used in Illinois, and do we recommend it on corn or soybeans? Ryegrass, in my opinion, is an advanced no-tillers cover crop. And I will normally recommend all the other cover crops first. If a farmer has experience and has shows that he knows how to manage a cover crop, then we'll recommend the ryegrass. And we normally will recommend the ryegrass when we have soil compaction issues and water drainage issues, because that's the cover crop of choice to fix those 2 issues. I'll put it in front of corn or put it in front of soybeans, it doesn't matter. There's no allelopathy from the ryegrass on corn or beans. We have no issues with it at all from that. And once the guys learn how to control it, most folks have no problem at all working with it. But it's an advanced no-tiller crop. I want them to have experience before I'll recommend it to anybody. The issue that's really big is the varieties on ryegrass. We have a lot of 4-H ryegrasses out there that are Italians, and we normally don't recommend Italians in a field situation. The problem we've got is we scientists call all ryegrass Italian, and it's not. There's 2 biotypes, Italian and Westerwald. Italian is Mediterranean ryegrass that was developed for 4-H only. Westerwald was a ryegrass that was developed to grow as a winter crop and die by itself in May. So they wouldn't have competition with it in their fields. It only germinates in the fall. It doesn't germinate in the spring, where Italian is bred to germinate in the spring as well.
So are they both lowly multiflorums?
They're both lowly multiflorums. 2 totally different development places in the world where they were developed. They are 2 totally different types of lowly multiflorum. And to throw them all in as Italian is a major mistake. They're totally different. They don't even act the same. I can plant a Westerwald in the spring. I won't get a very good stand, and it will die by itself in May. I plant an Italian ryegrass in the spring, The Italian will grow all summer, all fall, all winter, and next spring. It's a biennial if you plant it in spring. That's why we don't recommend Italians. That's why you need to know your seed supplier and who's recommending the seed and what's its parentage. We've got a lot of forage ryegrass out there, and most all the forage ryegrass is Italian. That's a problem.